What do you think of when you think about Leatherman? Now we think about the Leatherman Wave, we think about the Leatherman Surge. A lot of you probably think about the Leatherman Arc, but in the first several years of Leatherman, up until 1999, there was a lot of different tools that had come out. This is the Leatherman PST, or Personal Survival Tool, that came out. It was a very compact package. You can see how thin it is. I have done individual reviews on all of these. Then there was the Leatherman Mini Tool, and one of the cool things about this is it pretty much had a full-size plier head, but the handles folded in and out, and then it has some very small internal tools and a very minimalist collection of internal tools as well. So that was the Mini Tool. And then the next tool that came out was actually the Super Tool. This was a much larger version of essentially like a PST, and the tool set remains very similar to the Super Tool that we have even to this day. And then the PST2 came out. This included scissors, and in my version, I've actually been able to add a pocket clip on mine. And then the tool, the only tool we still have to this day, or the earliest tool from Leatherman, the Micra. So that came out, and then the original Leatherman Wave in 1998. I think it was first revealed at a SHOT Show or some trade show. And the Leatherman Wave, very narrow tool, but yet it had a great complement. No bit driver, but it was a fairly revolutionary tool that actually became Leatherman's best-selling tool. And then Leatherman went back to the drawing board and made a very thin tool, the side clip. And after the success of the side clip, I think this was one of the first multi-tools actually with a built-in pocket clip. With the success of the side clip, the next tool is actually the one we'll talk about today. This is the Leatherman Flare. So in 1999, Leatherman will make a step up in what is now called the everyday carry world, or EDC world, even though I don't think that was even a term back then. And Leatherman continues to do that different times in its history afterwards. I think about the Titanium Charge, the Leatherman Free series, and then finally the Arc and some of the variations that we have seen as Leatherman tries to go upscale. Now, as we look at the Leatherman Flare, there are several things that will never be repeated again. So the Leatherman Flare will be with us for about 5 years, 1999 to 2004, and then it disappears, never to be seen again. I think the closest thing to return was the Leatherman Garage, what was it called, like the European, or I'll put it on the screen what it was called, but a Leatherman Garage batch. And then the Juice series will carry on some of these characteristics. There is the corkscrew and this tool onto the outside. There are ruler measurements that are a little different from what we see on some Leathermans today. Look how those are sort of clumped together. This again is a very narrow tool right here, very compact. And on the inside we see what looks like essentially a Leatherman PST. But on the internal tools at the bottom, now none of these are locking tools, but inside we see this little fork right here, a set of scissors, and then a flat screwdriver. So definitely this is a tool you will never see again on a Leatherman. At least it hasn't been repeated since. Maybe sometime they'll do a throwback, but this one has never been repeated. We've talked about how unusual the cocktail fork is, but then the scissors are very similar, I think, to the PST2 scissors, these right here. They are spring-loaded, and they do look a little bit bigger than some of the scissors that Leatherman would put in the Leatherman Wave later on. Now, on the other side, unfortunately, I do have a broken serrated knife, and then there is the spreader knife right there for putting butter on bread or mayonnaise or whatever, and then the Phillips screwdriver and 2 more flat screwdrivers. So the Leatherman Flare was definitely a very different tool. Now on my particular one right here, I have a very hard time opening and closing these implements. This has definitely seen some use, I guess you could say, over the years right here, but I was able to actually afford this one due to its broken implement. Maybe someday I will get one in more of a pristine condition. Now on my flare, one of the things I do like is how Leatherman engraved flare on there. That's pretty cool. But on my particular version, the gold plating has worn off a little bit. This tool has definitely seen a lot of love and a lot of use. Now the Leatherman flare, as far as dimensions, again, it was a very light tool. And so that's one of the things that made it a little bit cool. And when we think about the length, open, it came in at 6.2 inches or 15.8 centimeters. Closed, it was 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And then it was 5/8 inch thick or 16 millimeters thick. And it weighed at 5.5 ounces or 155 grams. Let's compare this to the Leatherman Arc so you can get a little bit of an idea. So you can see how it is a little bit not quite as long, and then you can see how it's not quite as thick, but still that corkscrew does add to the thickness a little bit on the one side. Now, some time ago, I actually did find a copy, a clone of the Leatherman flare, and I did make a whole video on that, so I will link that below, and you should see a screenshot of that video on the screen. In that video or underneath it should be a link to where I found this tool. I'm not sure it's made anymore. Whenever I make videos and show you tools, a lot of times those tools don't always last that long, especially if they're clones. Sometimes they disappear pretty quickly, never to be seen of again. So I'm glad that I picked this up. I think when I bought this a couple years ago, this was only about $13 to $20, not that much. And with this, you see it does have the cocktail fork. It does have the scissors. It actually has spring-loaded pliers, which is a little different, but they are very cheap spring-loaded in that there is a spring right there. So not a huge fan of that. Overall, it is a very cheap tool. I don't think it's a great tool, but because it has the Leatherman flare tools, I picked it up because it's unusual. It does have this spreader knife right here that makes it very, yeah, you can tell it's a very close copy to the Leatherman flare. So I have seen people online ask, what is this little thing right here? Well, this right here was actually a place for you to be able to attach, I would attach like a keychain ring, and then you could have almost like a lanyard. You could attach your lanyard to it and hold it that way if you so desired, or attach it to a pack and so forth. So instead of having anything in the handle, like a lanyard attachment, they actually put it right there for several years, and you will see that on several different tools. It is tiny, but it is possible to find a way to attach it to a lanyard using that. Now, when we talk about the Leatherman flare's value, I think on eBay it comes in, from what I've seen, around $120 to $140. Different times you can buy some used versions for buy it now, somewhere around that price. And anything below $100 is essentially a good price for a Leatherman flare these days. They go, yeah, upwards of $130, $140. So it definitely is becoming a valuable tool to collect. Keep your eyes out for this. It was only made for 5 years. A pretty cool tool by Leatherman, but definitely you can see how Leatherman was trying to make a tool for those a little bit more well off. They were trying to reach higher in the market, and I think to this day we still see that mindset where Leatherman is constantly trying to reach up market. Now, one of the things I do want to think about this new year is sort of rethinking my continual harping about how expensive Leatherman is, because let's face it, Victorinox has some very, very expensive tools. So Victorinox has had some tools that they want to charge, what, like $400, $500, $600, $700 for, and Leatherman has no tool on the market even close to that at the moment. Now, they may next year, but at the moment, they don't. So perhaps Leatherman is more of a budget brand than we've been thinking about, even though their prices keep going up. One of the things to consider is that other people's and others' brands have skyrocketed in price as well. And so perhaps, even though Leatherman throughout the years has attempted to go up market and make things for those who we would consider maybe rich, Leatherman is still pretty reasonable in the United States. Overseas, the prices are a little bit crazy, as I have been reading you guys' comments, but in the US, prices are still a little bit more affordable perhaps.